Start here. Thank you all for being here. My name is Brad Woodhouse. I'm president of Americans United for Change. We are here on behalf of nearly 150 organizations who've come together to implore the U.S. Senate to oppose the nomination of Senator Jeff Sessions for Attorney General. And I'm happy to MC this group. There are a lot of people here who can talk to Sessions' lack of temperament, fitness, and qualifications to be Attorney General, but I'm so proud to be here to MC this event. And with us today, following my remarks, will be Nancy Zirkin. She's the Executive Vice President for the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. Janai Nelson, the Associate Director and Counsel of the NDoubleACP Legal Defense and Education Fund. Andrew Imperato, Executive Director, Association of University Centers on Disabilities, and Luis Torres, the Director of Policy and Legislation at the League of United Latin American Citizens. You know, with Senator Sessions' troubling decades-long record of racial insensitivity, hostility towards the LGBT community, callous attitude towards people with disabilities, and treatment of women as second-class citizens, not to mention his opposition and comments about immigrants, he is the wrong choice for Attorney General. I mean, the wrong choice. Even Donald Trump should be able to find somebody better than Jeff Sessions to serve as Attorney General of the United States, someone charged with carrying out the civil rights laws for all these groups of people that he has been hostile to and has opposed. Someone who is less partisan, someone who's less insensitive. Sessions was denied a federal judgeship by fellow Republicans in 1986 for a reason, and his record of racial and sexual bigotry and animus towards women's rights only got worse during his 20 years in the United States Senate. I mean, I want you to think about this. If somebody was too racially insensitive in 1986, when Jesse Helms was in the United States Senate, to get a federal judgeship, then how in the world do we think in 2016 he should be the Attorney General of the United States? And we have many, as I said, policy experts here I want to give the podium to in a moment, but just a note of what we're doing. Following this event, activists will hand deliver letters signed by nearly 150 national organizations to key senators that lays out the record on why Sessions in no way meets the standard to be the nation's top attorney, someone who is supposed to enforce all of American civil rights laws and be a fair arbiter of justice. So this is an important issue today. This organizing, and I want to compliment the Leadership Council, Leadership Conference for their work here. Organizing 150 groups is the first step in activating a grassroots army to go to senators' offices and say, you got to be somebody. There has to be somebody better than Senator Sessions to be our attorney general. So with that, I want to hand it over to Nancy Zirkin, as I said, the Executive Vice President at the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. Nancy.
Thanks, Brad.
Oh no, thank you.
And thank you all for being here. We are a coalition, the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, of over 210 national organizations. We are here today to oppose Jeff Sessions' confirmation as Attorney General because, based on his extensive record, he would reverse decades of progress for civil and human rights in America. We have just sent up the open letter to the Senate, signed by 145 diverse national organizations, which details our opposition. It is detailed, but let me just say this. Sessions voted against the same hate crimes law that he would be in charge of enforcing. Sessions voted against the same Violence Against Women Act that he would be charged with enforcing. The man who will be in charge of enforcing the Americans with Disability Act said it was, quote, irritated, end quote, to include students with disabilities in classrooms. And Sessions has shown so much hostility to voting rights that it's chilling to think he would be in charge of enforcing what remains of the Voting Rights Act. And Sessions has shown remarkable antagonism to immigrants, Muslims, the LGBT community, African Americans, people with disabilities, and to women. At a time when the nation wants a change from politics as usual, Jeff Sessions is a throwback to a time when America was not great for any of these communities. The Senate must reject the Sessions nomination, period, full stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. With that, let me turn it over to Andrew Imperato, Executive Director, Association of University Centers on Disabilities. Andrew.
Thank you. Thank you, Brad, and thank you, Nancy, for inviting us to be part of this. I'm here representing a number of national disability organizations that are opposing this confirmation. In the disability community, civil rights means integration for children and adults with disabilities, and we look to the Attorney General of the United States as the champion for integration for the federal government, recognizing the importance of the federal role. Senator Sessions' history, going back to when he was an Attorney General, State Attorney General in Alabama, has been hostile to integration of children and adults with disabilities. There was a landmark case in Alabama where he pushed back against integrating people with mental disabilities into the community. That case was called the Wyatt case. Fast forward in 2000 when he's a United States Senator and they're talking about the bipartisan reauthorization of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And as Nancy mentioned, his speech on the Senate floor was one of the most hostile speeches during that whole debate to the idea of civil rights for children with disabilities. He said that these integration requirements in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, quote, are the single most irritating problem for teachers throughout America today. That is not the kind of leadership that we want to see as the Attorney General of the United States. And we have a history in the disability community of having strong Republican champions, people like Dick Thornburgh, who as Attorney General of the United States negotiated the Americans with Disabilities Act on behalf of the Bush administration. People like Bob Dole, who will tell you one of his greatest accomplishments was the Americans with Disabilities Act, and more recently championed U.S. ratification of the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. And where was Senator Sessions on that? He voted against ratification of the UN Convention. The disability community doesn't like to have to oppose nominees. We expect a Republican administration to put forward Republican champions who support civil and human rights for children and adults with disabilities. Senator Sessions is not one of those champions, and that's why we are opposing him today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. With that, let me turn it over to Luis Torres, the Director of Policy and Legislation at the League of United Latin American Citizens. Luis?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the League of United Latin American Citizens, the nation's oldest, largest Latino civil rights organization in the country, I'm here to express our deep concerns regarding the nomination of Senator Sessions as the next U.S. Attorney General. In our eyes, Senator Sessions' racist and anti-immigrant remarks, well documented, make him unfit to lead the U.S. Department of Justice. Just 30 years ago, as was mentioned, Senator Sessions was rejected as a nominee because the Senate Judiciary Committee objected to racist remarks he had made about the NDoubleACP and the ACLU, calling them un-American and then expressing sympathy for the KKK. This is the same man who several years ago ridiculed Dominican immigrants, saying that they had no provable skill that could be an asset to them being in this country. I'm sure Secretary Perez would disagree with that. I'm sure that the first Dominican American elected to Congress in this last cycle would object to that. And of course we object to that as the League of United Latin American Citizens. And perhaps more dangerous than his words are his policies. Senator Sessions has criticized President Obama's Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, which grants talented and extraordinary undocumented youth legal status and freedom from deportation. Now we fear that Senator Sessions will target the over 750,000 DACA applicants and their families in some way to make it easier to deport them. In addition, because as Attorney General, Sessions would have control over the Board of Immigration Appeals, the nation's highest administrative body for interpreting and applying immigration laws, we fear he would change the process that determines due process for immigrants, their eligibility for benefits, and the circumstances under which they can contest their removal from the country. Senator Sessions has been aggressively anti-immigrant throughout his entire political career. He has received the lowest scores possible on both the National Hispanic Leadership Agenda and the NDoubleACP congressional scorecards, and he's been praised by white supremacist, anti-immigrant groups like the Federation for American Immigration Reform as the most nativist senator, a label that Mr. Sessions has embraced. For those reasons, we stand against the nomination of Senator Sessions and urge the Senate to reject him as the next Attorney General.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Luis. We're waiting on Janae Nelson, and we'll take questions in just a minute. And Nancy, you may have some more remarks, or additional things to say, but one of the things I don't think we've mentioned that I find most troubling about the past of Senator Sessions is his involvement in this, in what Republicans and he did when he was in Alabama on this issue of voter fraud. As we know, you have a president-elect who has claimed without a bit of proof that millions of people voted illegally in this election. It's not true. There's not an expert that'll tell you that it's true. There's not a state Secretary of State that'll tell you it's true. They'll tell you it's a lie. It's made up. The whole concept of some massive impersonation of other people type of voter fraud doesn't exist in this country. There have been study after study after study that has proved that a billion votes cast, that you couldn't find only a handful of times that anyone used the wrong name to vote or impersonated a voter. But Senator Sessions believes and has fomented this lie for decades, going back that he led a voter fraud witch hunt targeting black civil rights workers in Alabama. And I think if you look at this issue and how it manipulated this election, how this president-elect is so concerned about his place, I guess, in history, that he won the election but now wants to claim that there was voter fraud that prevented him from winning the popular vote. These are the people that are now going to be carrying out the laws of this land, and I find it so unbelievably objectionable that he would be the Attorney General of the United States. Do you want to add anything before we go to the question?
Are there any questions? Yeah.
You've opposed Senator Sessions. Who would you suggest that's a realistic option? Who would you like to see replace him?
I don't think that if we actually suggested anyone, Mr. Trump is going to listen. What we would hope is that he would nominate somebody else that does not have this huge record of hostility to all the diverse communities as well as to the Voting Rights Act. Yes, 30 years ago, he had an appalling record on enforcing voting rights. But in the past 20 years in the Senate, he continues that. We believe, as I think most people in this country believe, that the Voting Rights Act enacted in 1965 in response to the entire disenfranchisement of black and brown communities. People supported it, but yet when the Supreme Court struck down the most important part of it, and I will call it accountability or pre-clearance as it's known, he praised the decision. And what we saw in this past election was a variety of closing of poll closures. We actually put out a report on it just before the election. Some 700 poll closures, lots of confusion around polling places, states trying to say that you had to have a voter ID even though you didn't, even though courts said no. So when we see somebody like this, who has the full range of antagonism towards civil and human rights, we have to speak up. And the fact that there are 145 national organizations on this letter, I think speaks for itself. Had we had more time, we would have had many more, which we expect to. Thank you.
Yeah, let me say one thing in response to that question. There is also this issue of, you know, we're not going to recommend who Donald Trump should appoint to be Attorney General. I think Nancy said if we recommended it, there's no way they would get it. But there are plenty of legal minds that are more moderate, less extreme, less racially insensitive than Senator Sessions. And besides, you know, it does not have to be someone who is a strict partisan. I mean, this is someone who served in the United States Senate for 20 years, who's opposed everything a Democratic president wanted to do, supported everything a Republican president wanted to do, who is a strict partisan. There are career people who would maybe favor Donald Trump or Republican leaning that might be perfectly qualified to be Attorney General. So the pool is not just people who serve over there or who endorse Donald Trump. They're a pool of conservative legal minds and prosecutors. So the list is long, potentially, if Donald Trump would think outside of the people, just the people who supported him and just the people who rallied his base in this election. Are there other questions?
Have you held any meetings with any of these senators or requested any with the president-elect or anybody?
I'm sorry.
Have you requested any meetings with the president-elect or the vice president-elect or any of the senators that you're hoping would change their decisions and vote against their nomination?
We are in the process of organizing our lobbying effort. I personally have spoken to a number of senators. Truth is that there are senators who are willing to be civil on this because of senatorial courtesy. We think that's ridiculous. We think an attorney general has to enforce the law evenly and fairly for all Americans.
And I don't think this delivery of these letters is an unimportant act. This is the opening, the opening dialogue that we want to have with these senators, and it's a dialogue that can't just happen in Washington. There's a lot of grassroots energy. I mean, these 145 organizations represents thousands and thousands of activists who will be in touch with these senators. I'll tell you this: Nancy and I are going to be involved in a campaign that doesn't involve these senators hearing from their constituents.
Exactly.
So with that, we have one more speaker. Let me turn it over to Janae Nelson, the Associate Director Counsel of the NDoubleACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for your patience. I'm the Associate Director Counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund. We were founded in 1940 by the late Thurgood Marshall, who was the first African-American Supreme Court Justice. We stand on 76 years of legacy of enforcing and protecting civil rights on behalf of African-Americans and all Americans. But today I stand before you to sound an alarm for our democracy. There is a threat to our democracy from within. As head of the Department of Justice, the nation's top law enforcement official, the position of Attorney General is one of unparalleled power within the executive branch, and it has profound implications not only for civil rights, but for our constitutional principles and for the rule of law. The Attorney General must ensure the fair and impartial administration of justice to all Americans, including by monitoring and enforcing Americans' constitutional and civil rights. It is therefore essential that any nominee's record is thoroughly and closely scrutinized before nomination, and most importantly, before confirmation to this position of extraordinary public trust, and, if necessary, that nomination be firmly opposed. Any examination of the 30-year record of Senator Jeff Sessions demonstrates that he is unfit to be the chief enforcer of the nation's civil rights laws. This is not just about 1986, when during his consideration for federal judgeship, we learned that he called our sister organizations, the NDoubleACP and the ACU, un-American, and that he thought the KKK was okay until he found out that they smoked marijuana. This is about 1986 and his consistent record of hostility to our nation's civil rights throughout his career since then. Jeff Sessions has criticized the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the landmark civil rights law that helped to eradicate discrimination in elections, as intrusive. And he agreed with the Supreme Court's 2013 decision, Shelby County versus Alabama, that struck down key provisions of that law, setting off a firestorm of voter suppression. Senator Sessions has also opposed recent efforts to restore and update the Voting Rights Act, defying a specific directive of this Supreme Court. In 2006, Senator Sessions supported a federal constitutional amendment to ban same-sex marriage. In 2009, Jeff Sessions voted against the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act, which expanded federal hate crime legislation to include crimes motivated by a victim's actual or perceived gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability in the name of fatal victims of the most vile and brutal racial and anti-gay violence. In 2009, Senator Sessions voted against the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act of 2009, which amended the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to ensure that it does not unfairly bar claims of unequal pay because of your gender. In 2013, Senator Sessions voted against the 2013 reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act. Jeff Sessions has also been a chief opponent in the Senate to bipartisan efforts to reduce or eliminate the overly harsh federal sentences for drug offenses that disproportionately impact communities of color. Jeff Sessions has consistently voted against and rhetorically opposed judicial nominees who have civil rights or public defender backgrounds. And just this year, Jeff Sessions publicly praised the 1980s ad by Donald Trump that called for the execution of the Central Park five African-American young men who were exonerated 5 years ago. These are teens who spent 2 decades in jail for a crime that they did not commit, and Jeff Sessions believed in 2016 that calling for their execution was praiseworthy. This is not the record of someone who believes in the rule of law. This is not the record of someone who believes in equal protection for all people. This is not the record of anyone in whom we can entrust the post of chief law enforcement in the country. This threat to our democracy must also be seen in the context of the President-elect's other appointments and policy pronouncements since the election. Jeff Sessions' appointment, along with the appointment of Stephen Bannon as the chief strategist and senior counselor in the White House, Betsy DeVos as education secretary, and the list goes on, sends an ominous message to a majority of the country who did not vote for this president-elect and do not endorse his radical nominations. Jeff Sessions' nomination is a dog whistle to radical extremists within our borders, as much as the discussion of creating a Muslim registry is, under the precedent of interning Japanese Americans in connection with World War II. We can and we must resist the nomination of Jeff Sessions at all costs. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Janae. Before we conclude, are there any more questions? Great. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming. We're gonna go deliver these letters now, and #StopSessions. Thanks, everybody.